Hey, everybody. Welcome to another live episode of Mavens of Data. We've got a really good show for you today. We're going to be talking about how to land your first data role. Let me introduce these amazing guests. You probably already know them from LinkedIn. They have huge followings because they're sharing really good advice for folks who are trying to break into a data career, which both of them have done fairly recently, much more recently than I have. So they're much better experts on this topic in today's market. We've got Annie and Ian. Before, when the three of us were kind of preparing for this show, one of the things that came up was that the job market today is so different from when you two were breaking in, and it felt like we really needed to talk about that to do the show justice for the audience. So Annie, maybe could you talk a little bit about like what's going on in the job market right now? Why do you think that's the case today?
Yeah. I had brought this up to everybody because I was thinking about how a lot of times on the internet, people who are content creators, including myself, can talk about, here's what I did when I was becoming a data analyst. And I see a lot of stories now about people talking about how easy it is to become a data analyst. And here's the steps, not Ian or I. And it just kind of waters down that like they got their job in a very different market. Ian and I got our first jobs in a very different market. And it just doesn't feel fair for us to come on here and be like, here's how you become a data analyst. Here's what we did. And then ignore that the market is really different now. I mean, I think like could be for a lot of reasons. Like the economy has just been really bad. So like in general, it's just not a job seekers market anymore. And a lot of companies are kind of looking to fill maybe like more mid to senior level roles. And there's a lot more people because the Google Data Analytics Certificates course is really popular. Remote work is really popular. But I think that like it's not just the popularity of people in the industry, because more and more companies have more and more data. And so like I think the trend is still going upwards on like the amount of data jobs that's needed. I just think that right now there's not a lot of money. There's like a lot of senior positions needed. And so getting a job now, my recommendations are different than they would have been 2 years ago. And I want to be honest with that.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. I'd say, Ian, let's kind of building on that. I'd love to hear your take. Like, I think you were on the same page with Annie that for the entry level role, it's still pretty brutal. What do you think about sort of like long-term prospects for like, is this still a good career path? People who are here are thinking about getting in. Are they too late? Like, are you guys the last ones on the bus, or is this still a good idea and will it still be fruitful if they can get in?
Sure. Yeah. Right off the bat, I don't think it's too late. I still believe it's the best decision I've ever made, and I'll continue to make that decision as I advance in my career. But it, like what Annie was saying, it could be just as difficult now as it was before. And it had me think about, what did I do to start? And yeah, it's totally different nowadays. But if you were to do it now, it might not just be doing easy applies or the old school way of applying to jobs. It'd be more of the networking and trying to get in contact with the right people. But, to kind of circle back to the question, I fully think that if you have the right strategy, even if you think you're starting late in the game, you're not, you're just starting now. So try not to judge anyone else's book by the cover, because they're on chapter 30 and you might just be on chapter 1. So try not to look too much into the influencers or people on social media. If you're just starting now, just kind of focus on what you're doing, set up your own roadmap, and try to be consistent about it.
Yeah, it's awesome. Really, really good comment from Heather here in the audience too, in the chat. That basically, if you're looking for remote, there's so much competition for those jobs because like everybody wants them, right? We're all three of us are remote. My life is so much better because I'm remote. I couldn't go back basically at this point, but like everybody knows that, and companies are kind of fighting against it a little bit. So if they have those remote roles, they're super high competition level. So yeah, really, really good stuff, both Annie and Ian. Thank you guys. How about for analysts that are like, they're trying to break in right now, which is basically everybody on this call. what do you think are some of the biggest skills that that people should focus on? And Annie, let's go to you for a couple of the top skills first again.
Yeah, so a lot of people are really focused when they're getting into the industry, I'd say, on the technical skills, because yes, you do need to learn SQL for the first time, and you need to learn Excel, and you need to learn to use a visualization tool. And so like, I understand why that's such a big mental hurdle. But like we've been saying, getting into the industry now, a lot of it is like networking and the soft skills. And the reason that you're going to get a job, and the market was starting to turn when Ian and I were getting jobs. And so I think Ian has a story about this, but like definitely even my first job I got because they liked me, not because I blew them away with technical skills. And so being able to showcase that you have good critical thinking skills and that you know business stuff. I mean, I tell people, if you have a way to prove that you can be a data analyst, like at your job, using the things that you do, talk to the people at your job about that. Like just start doing projects on your own data, because it's kind of like I think the emphasis, especially online, I can make a post about 5 SQL functions you need to know in interviews, and it'll get like a lot of views. And then I can actually post something really valuable about like the soft skills you need to get through an interview, and it won't get as many clicks because people aren't as interested in it. But that's actually those soft skills of like communication and like knowing the business and stuff. That's actually, I think, what's going to get you a job.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love you kind of quickly touched on what I talk about as the side door strategy, where, you know, if you're already at a company in a non-data analyst role, but you want a data analyst role, sometimes like a great strategy is just start doing some data analyst work there, like get whatever data you can have. I'm thinking of somebody that I used to work with that was on a customer success team, and he just kind of plowed into handling all the analysis for the enterprise customers. And eventually I think he got the title. I don't know. I always thought of him as a data analyst after that. And he was really, really good. But he was a guy that they already liked on CS, and he just started doing the work that he was sort of teaching himself on the side. And it was a great move. So yeah, that's, I think, really good advice there, and really good advice about the communication skills. It's such an important piece for any analyst to be actually effective, right? It's not a role that you're operating in a vacuum. There's almost no analyst that can make an impact that way. You have to be both technical and have those interpersonal skills. Ian, so Annie talked a lot about the interpersonal communication skills. Let's talk a little bit about the technical. If you were advising somebody where to start, like what muscles to be building in terms of just technical skills, where do you think somebody should focus day one?
Day one, I usually go with Excel, because that's like your foundation for your building blocks to learn other skills like SQL or Power BI or Tableau. And there's like a caveat to that. There's Excel, there's Google Sheets, there's so many different flavors of SQL. There's Tableau, Power BI, there's Looker. All of these comparable skills have like transferable skills within them. So don't focus too much on, is this the best one? Do more people or do more jobs look for this type of technical skill? I think if you have just the basic spreadsheet skill, SQL skill, and BI skills, that should be good enough. Because once you're in a job, skills change, but you don't change too much. So you want to focus, focus on those technical skills, but you do want to focus on being that person that they like during the interview, because that's just so important.
Yeah. We were talking about that and getting ready for the show, and thinking about, like, I've hired people that didn't have the SQL skills for 100% SQL job, but because they had other skills that, and we thought we could teach them that. But I've never wanted to hire somebody that I just thought was a jerk or like was going to be hard to work with. I think that one's insurmountable and a total deal breaker for me. So yeah, I think that's a really good piece in there, Ian.
You can teach the technical skills. You can't teach a person to be like eager to want to be at that job.
Yeah, empathy and interpersonal skills is much, much harder to work on. So pick your battles as somebody training folks. Annie, so Ian talked about like Excel being kind of the first stop. I agree with that. I think it's the least intimidating. I think it's such a good way to get into logical functions and thinking about rows and tables. And I think if you do other stuff first, you might get scared away versus like Excel, you can get moving literally today. Where would you go after Excel if that was your first stop? And what's stop number 2 in your mind, Annie?
Yeah, so I think that, in my opinion, you start with the Excel because you can see the things on the screen, and then like you can see the rows and the columns and stuff from the way that these things work. And then my next stop after that is SQL, because I think that once you started to think about like, okay, in Excel, I'm manipulating the data in this way, then SQL is doing that. You just don't get to see it doing that. And interestingly, with kind of the steps along the way, I have a friend who's here today in the audience who is learning SQL and stuff right now. And she learned JavaScript a while back. And then she came into SQL and she's like, oh my gosh, SQL is so nice. So I'm not recommending that you learn JavaScript or Python before learning SQL, but just to anybody, because Ian and I both started, Ian, you started with Python unnecessarily, right? Yeah. So if you did happen to start with Python unnecessarily, I jumped into it like way too quickly. Don't feel bad, because when you do kind of go back to SQL, you're like, wow, this is so much better.
I think that's such good advice. Yeah, SQL is not that scary. But yeah, I think Excel first will make SQL easier. And SQL, in terms of any language you could learn, it's really not that bad. Ian, I'd love to hear a little bit more about you starting Python too early. Like where in your personal journey was it, and how did that feel?
That was kind of day one, which was weird. It was before I even wanted to become a data analyst. I kind of wanted to get a high salaried tech skill, a career. So I went with programming because I always heard, growing up, if you're in tech, you make a lot of money. So I dove into Python, and then that just kind of opened the door to data analytics. And I did my research, and everything I read online said, learn Python as part of your tech stack. So I continued on until I still wasn't even that good. I got into different libraries and such, but I wanted to dive in once I got to like the data visualization within Python, matplotlib. I wanted to look up BI tools. And then once I did that, that's kind of where I was like, oh, I really enjoy this. And so I just leaned into that part of the tech stack. And then, here I am now.
Yeah, you jumped right into the deep end in what I would say is not the easiest thing to learn in our space.
No.
It's so interesting. So I think one of the things we do hear that over and over again, that Python is kind of like one of the most in-demand skills in data. And it's a really interesting one because it's like you could use it as a data analyst, but like a lot of data analysts don't really use it that much. And in my career, I haven't really needed to use it as a data analyst. But data scientists really do use it pretty heavily. Data engineers use it pretty heavily. So it's one of those that sort of sits at the intersection of all the three careers. So in that sense, it is like a super valuable skill to have. I just think day one, you're biting off a lot to like learn about data and the coding language. And it's just, I'm glad I didn't. I feel like I probably would have gotten intimidated and been like, no, I'll do something else, So yeah, really good to hear that experience. Awesome. Let's talk a little bit about advice for kind of networking and finding jobs. Ian, maybe if you could start this one off. Like, if folks are thinking about applying specifically, like I think that's a big thing. A lot of folks on this call right now are about to be at that stage where they want to apply and they're trying to figure it out. How would you recommend that in today's market?
Sure. So I've been actually recommending this more frequently lately, is how I landed my last 2 data roles very recently. So my current job, I landed about 6 months ago. So it's a very recent strategy that I've been using. It doesn't require the job board. You use LinkedIn as a search tool, kind of like you would with Google, and you type in hiring data analyst or hiring analysts in the search bar, and then you filter the posts, most recent, and then you look for people who are looking to hire on their team. So this can be, it could be the HR person, it could be the CEO, it could be a hiring manager, who knows what. But there's a lot of spam, so you have to be careful when you filter all those posts. You don't find that many positions throughout the day. You might find a handful versus the job board obviously has thousands you could apply to. But I found that I only had to talk to, under 20 people to get my last job versus having to apply to like 100 jobs on the job board. I'll take the other strategy because it's a better ROI. It's actually networking in a sense. Online networking, that's about as much as you can do. But I found that way to find the right people the best for me. And I know I teach that with my coaching students, and it works for them too. So it's not just me.
Yeah, it's a really smart approach. I want to hear Annie's take. I also want to hear from the audience real quick. Quick question. If you guys could throw into the chat, just throw a number. If you're applying right now and you are using kind of that LinkedIn apply or other similar methods, how many applications do you think you're submitting for per one interview that you're getting? I'd just love to kind of get some feedback on the numbers. Like what is everybody experiencing right now in the market would be super interesting. So yeah, Kevin says 50. David is saying basically infinity, not getting any interviews. Yeah, 50 to 1. So yeah, that's pretty brutal. And so, Ian, your numbers were much better than that. You're getting a pretty high connect rate, which is really great. Annie, anything else you would say in terms of applying and networking in general that you would give advice on?
Yeah, when I was getting my first job, I actually got it because I started creating content on LinkedIn, and you do not need to become a content creator in order to get a job. But I started just creating content about like the things that I was doing in Tableau. Like I think the post that got the attention of the person who found me for my first job was like, did you know that you can do data cleaning in Tableau? Which I now would not recommend, by the way, but I was learning about it. And people had reached out to me because they had seen what I was doing. I've also gotten reached out before. I had a really a visualization that I put on Tableau Public that did really well. And I got 2 companies that reached out to me just from seeing that and offered for me to interview with them. So those are ways. But my big kind of pitch for networking is the in-person networking. I was nervous about it when I didn't do it when I was looking for my first job. But I got this job that I'm at now because I went up and talked to a speaker after a session at the Tableau conference, which is really expensive to attend. And so I'm not saying you have to go to the Tableau conference, but going to conferences and networking there, if you can find free ones. And then at least Tableau has in most big cities a Tableau user group where you can go and you can meet people and you can network. New York City has a low-key data happy hour. And if you look around on LinkedIn, I think other cities are picking it up now. I think there's one in Austin, San Francisco, London, where there's a kind of a broader range of just data people. And so going to those and chatting with people, having your LinkedIn just look nice. You don't have to be a content creator, but just having a nice looking LinkedIn with a clear profile picture, a banner, what you do, not aspiring data analyst, just data analyst, maybe a couple projects pinned on there so that when you go, you can be like, oh, here's my LinkedIn, because that's kind of how people connect at networking events. They say, oh, here's my LinkedIn. And my last tip for this is when you go to the networking events, just be aware that everybody else there feels just as awkward as you do. So if you're an introvert, welcome to tech. A lot of people in tech are introverts. And so we all just sit there at networking events, hoping that somebody else will break the ice, hoping that somebody else will walk up to us and say, hey, you look really interesting. Like we should have a conversation or whatever. And so do it. At the Tableau conference, I brought a bag of Laffy Taffies, which are candies with jokes on them for people who don't know. And I was at a networking event and I walked up to people and I said, I got this for you, but you can only have it if you read the joke. And it was awkward. And we both acknowledged that it was awkward, but we both laughed. And then we moved on and had a really good conversation. So it's awkward for everybody, but everybody's looking for someone to break the ice. So
That's so awesome. And I guarantee all those people who got that, they remember you much more than somebody that like shook their hand and gave them a business card, which I don't even know if people are really using business cards anymore. You know, but Laffy Taffy is the new business card. You heard it here from Annie. That's awesome. I think it's really good advice. And think about that, like the difference. One end of the spectrum is like you're sitting at your house, you're hitting easy apply along with 1,000 other people versus, you know, you're face to face with the hiring manager, not necessarily saying, hey, can you give me a job? Just meeting them, talking about what you're enthusiastic about. Like, we're both in the same space. I'm really fired up about this specific thing in it. And maybe that strikes a chord, and then it kind of flips it from, next time when they have a job opening, they're reaching out to you, right? Is that how that happened with you, Annie? It is, right?
Yeah, when I was at the Tableau conference, I went up and talked to a speaker who I was looking for a job, but not from her because I wanted to stay in consulting and she wasn't in consulting. I just really liked what she was talking about. And so we were chatting and we chatted for a while. We connected on LinkedIn. Right after the conference, I did a big push to be putting a lot of good stuff on LinkedIn, which made me more visible. I think she would have remembered me either way, but I think that was helpful. And so then a couple weeks later, she said, hey, we have this role or opening up my organization. Now I know that they were migrating into Tableau and didn't have anyone who really knew Tableau. And I had made it very clear that I knew Tableau very well. And so she thought of me. She's the vice president of data and analytics at GitLab. And so she referred me. And so as soon as the role opened up, I got a message from the recruiter on LinkedIn and got through the process. I was the first person to get through. So it was helpful.
That's great. Yeah, that's great. I mean, and that just, think about that. It just changes that dynamic so much that, you know, a warm referral, you're becoming the prize asset versus just one of 1,000 people competing for a job and you're just a name on a piece of paper. So yeah, fantastic advice there. I love it. That's great. So folks in the audience, you're doing a great job of filling up that questions tab. Continue to do that. We're about 10, 15 minutes away from putting these folks in the hot seat. So keep doing that. Upvote questions you like. I'd love to kind of shift the conversation into the next phase and talk about, okay, now you've landed the job. Say it's picture yourself in your first job. You're knowing what you know now. Our audience is hoping to get there pretty soon. A lot of these folks, and hopefully they will pretty soon. What advice would you give kind of yourself on day one about, you know, how to onboard, how to set yourself up for success, whether that's relationships or learning about the company? Maybe Ian, would you kick us off on this one?
Yeah. So every company's different. So their onboarding process is going to be different, right? Obviously, stick to whatever their process is so you don't sway too much. But outside of that, if it's not within the onboarding process, I would start to get to know your coworkers or other people in the department. Just do a little 15-minute introduction call, throw it on their calendar so you can just meet everyone, see what they're working on, see what their pain points are, and maybe even chat with them on a weekly basis so you could get to know them, build that relationships with other coworkers. So what you're doing here is essentially keeping your name at the top of their mind if they have a problem that you can help them out with. So if you start getting these wins for your coworkers, those wins translate to being talked about with their manager. And if there's a leadership meeting, if your name keeps getting brought up, that's an easier way to get a promotion or something like that. So building that relationship at the get-go is fantastic. Not a lot of people do it. Honestly, everywhere I've been, no one reaches out to me. I'm always the person that has to reach out to everyone else. So if you're that person, that's huge for you.
Yeah, that's awesome. Just quick follow-up on that. So I think some people might be thinking like, oh, I'm new on day one. I feel weird about blocking somebody's calendar or like, you know, setting up. How often do you get somebody that says like, no, I don't want to meet with you for like an intro meeting? Like, has that ever happened to you? What do you think?
No, I don't think it has. Yeah. I feel like that'd be kind of weird. But if they did, I'd be okay with that. But then I would never try to reach out to them again.
Yeah.
But no pushback on that. Everyone's been super nice and helpful everywhere I've been. It has been stressful at certain jobs, won't lie there, but the people I work with, they're the people or the reasons why I always miss a job when I have to move on to another one.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I've had a very similar experience where every time when I've started a new job, I try to set up face-to-face time with as many people as I can kind of in the first month, like multiple meetings a day if it's a big company. And I've never had anybody say, no, I don't want to meet with you. Like everybody's happy to do it. And it's a great way to build relationships. It's a great way to learn about the company. So I think that's fantastic advice. Don't wait for the company to set up your onboarding schedule. You also just look like somebody who takes initiative and is like going to be sort of a go-getter and get things done. So I think that's amazing advice. Annie, how about you? What advice would you give to Annie on day one at that first analyst job?
I think to start with day -3, you know everything that you already are going to know. And so don't spend the entire weekend before like trying to cram knowledge in.
Yeah.
It's like, enjoy your last weekend of freedom before you're employed. But then on day one, kind of 2 paths. First of all, you can sit down with your manager for this, but if they don't want to, if it's not built into the structure, come up with like a 30, 60, 90-day plan. What I'm going to be doing at 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. It's kind of tough for your first job. So I know it feels kind of vague of like, what is this? You might need a couple weeks actually to figure out what that even looks like, but come in with a goal in mind and like this understanding of like the development that you want to progress on. And so that's kind of that side of it. It can be technical or not technical. And then the other side, like Ian was saying, is getting to know people. I think beyond getting to know people is like he said, their pain points. And so getting access to all the systems, whether it's like Salesforce or Zuora or whatever, and just kind of looking around and understanding how the company creates and uses data and trying to understand what are the top priorities. Like, oh, right now, the C-suite is really thinking about these 3 priorities. And so like, I'm going to look for where these are coming up in my job. And this like feels overwhelming, honestly, like as I'm saying it, but this is all just context, right? You're not responsible for what the C-suite is responsible for. But just like having this context and knowing that you have the permission to be new and no one hired you as an entry-level data analyst because they wanted a senior level data analyst. And if they did, you're probably at the wrong place. So they want you to be there ready to learn. And so just getting the exposure and just treating your brain like a sponge. Sometimes like when I've been eating too much food, I'm like afraid to weigh myself because I don't want it to be super high. But then I'm like, but if you do it now, then in a month from now, you'll have lost 10 pounds. And it's like similarly to that, like take the pressure off of like on day one, just use that as, okay, on day 1, but then on day 90, look at how much progress I'm going to make.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I think, taking the pressure off is huge. I remember a new job I started and it was like a startup, kind of small. I got locked out of my machine within like 10 minutes. And I felt like so nervous that I was going to have to go to IT, somebody I didn't know. And like, this is the first impression of me, this dumb guy that like just already forgot his password and can't do anything now. And like the guy was so nice that helped me. That, I don't think it hurt my career there at all. I think that's, it's really good advice. I love that you said kind of like, take that time for a breath, for like some fun time, enjoy the last weekend. You want to come in with a spring in your step, a happy person. That's much bigger than like eking out the last thing I wanted to learn with SQL or Python before day 1. But then I've got bags under my eyes and I'm like kind of sad and tired. Come in strong. Like the happy person you can be is probably so much more important. So that's really good advice. The other thing I'll throw in some advice on this one is I always try to figure out some specific people in the company, people that fill certain roles. So like who are kind of like the main decision makers? Like if I found some important insight in the data, who would be the person that I have to convince to take action? So like get a list of those people. And that might be like in your department, as the company as a whole, depending on, how big the company is. The other 2 that I always try to find are who's the biggest expert in the database. And sometimes it might be an analyst. it's not the VP of analytics. That person is maybe a little more guiding the team and working on careers and stuff, but it might be sort of a mid-level person that's pretty senior and has their game really sharp, but is still super hands-on. Or I've come into a company that was pretty big and didn't have any analytics department. And so that was an engineer. There was just, he wasn't called a data engineer, he was just a back-end engineer. And I found he was the guy that when I had questions that I couldn't figure out myself about the nuances, he was the guy. And then similarly, who's the person that, like, if you needed to change something in the data, who's got the keys for that? And I think if you can find out kind of those three groups of people, I think that really, really helps, and try to do that as early as possible and make sure all those three groups of people like you, go to lunch with them, whatever, bribery is can help. But awesome. So yeah, so we've talked about kind of the job market. We've talked about the skills. We've talked about how to succeed in role. I think we could jump into Q&A. We've got quite a number of questions. Checkwas has this question here. How does age affect your chance of getting into your first data role? So I don't know, Annie, would you want to take this question? Maybe we can alternate.
Yeah, so I think that I'm not going to say that age doesn't matter. I would like to say that age doesn't matter. I'm not going to say that because I think we all have, if you're really young, we know if somebody's really young and they're kind of just fresh out of college. And so it's important to kind of have the attitude of like knowing that you're young, but you're eager, you're excited, and showing like what you can do without trying to make it seem like you've got 20 years of experience when you don't have it. Yeah. And then I think everything from like the fresh out of college until maybe like upper 40s, 50s, I've talked to people who are trying to become a data analyst who are there, and they've said, oh, well, no one's going to hire someone who's old, in their words, not my words, that they, like no one's going to hire someone. And I've said to them, I think that you just need to think about it differently. And so if you have had a career for a long time, like what I said earlier, your soft skills, so important. Understanding about businesses, so important. And so if you're in your 40s, you're in your 50s, you already understand what it means to be a decision maker, what it means to be a manager, like how companies create and use data, maybe not in those terms, but you actually understand those things. So think about how you can frame your age as a positive thing. If you're really young and just came out of college, you're really eager to learn, everywhere in the middle is kind of this soup in the middle, but then older is like, I have this business experience, I have this life experience. It's just a pivot for me, but I'm going to take all of that and I'm going to apply it here. Yeah.
Yeah. I think everybody thinks that it's the funny thing is like, we're all kind of nervous and self-doubting, and everybody thinks that their age is like a weakness, right? Like the person who's 22, they think, hey, I'm too young, I don't have the experience. The person who's 50 thinks, hey, they're viewing me as too old, I can't learn. Like we're all nervous about our age for some reason or another. I think just really, really good advice from Annie that, think about what are the advantages that you have. And we get probably this question, we get more from the more senior career transitioners that have done 15 years of another job or 25 years of another job. And we see the same doubt over and over again. And Annie's advice is so good that it's like, yeah, maybe you don't fit what the company thinks as their prototype of the right out of school for this entry level job, but you come with so many things that entry level person just cannot compete with, experience in business. I'm guessing you're not out partying like maybe a little more reliable and bright-eyed, bushy-tailed on Monday morning and stuff, things like that. So it's awesome advice there. We've got another one here from Melissa. If you were just starting out, what types of projects would you focus on in order to get your portfolio to stand out in this market? Such a good question. Ian, can you talk about how you think about projects and what you'd recommend?
Sure. So there's kind of two ways. If you're trying to enter a certain domain, I would focus more on my projects with that domain in mind. So marketing, analytics, you want to focus on maybe sales or campaign type dashboards for your projects. Healthcare analysts, maybe more on the healthcare data sets and focus it more over there. Or you can be a kind of a more generalized and do what interests you most. and build projects around that, just because when you go to present your projects during an interview, if they ask about it, you come off as more confident when you're talking about it if you're more interested in it. Or you could go a complete route like I did and make a fictitious data set and then a totally random dashboard, but I still answered my fictitious questions with that dashboard. So it's not just a exploratory dashboard. It actually had a goal in mind before I created it. So those are kind of the few ways that I would go about it. So yeah, if you got a certain domain, focus on domain projects in that area, or generalize it and then do something that interests you.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm thinking of one of our students, Caitlin Lemon, who I was just seeing if she's in the chat here. She's not, but she was trying to transition. She was coming from marketing, and she was kind of like struggling a little bit, feeling like, how am I going to do this? And then her big aha moment was, she's like, I'm not going to think analyst. I'm going to think marketing analyst. And she really doubled down like how she was learning, the projects she was putting together, and she kind of messaged herself a little bit differently. And then instead of kind of this generic problem that she could, kind of solve for a bunch of departments, she would solve the marketing analytics problem perfectly for the marketing analytics department, right? And she very quickly, after pivoting that, like really accelerated the pace, and just an awesome case study there that was pretty recent too. She just got her job.
Yeah,
so,
and if anyone's looking for a marketing data set, John's data set, or one of the capstone projects in your advanced SQL course, is fantastic.
Oh yeah. Maven Fuzzy Factory. That was the first data set that I built specifically for a course, and it's a data set about manufacturing teddy bears in an online e-commerce company. It's kind of a hilarious concept, but it is actually, it's pretty rich. We were trying to figure out how to do an advanced analysis course with SQL, and like all the data sets that were out there were just like, they weren't really good for analysis. Like if you guys have seen like the Sequila database from that MySQL comes with, it's really good in terms of seeing how tables relate to each other. So if you're sort of trying to be technical, like database administration, it's good for that. But it didn't have there's no real trends. If you actually try to analyze any of that data, it's like hilarious. It was clearly not made by an analyst. So we invested in that. So yeah, thanks for that shout out, Ian. That's I'm really happy with that data set. I think it's one of the best out there. Toot my own horn a little bit, but I'm glad we invested the time to do it. So Pranav has a great question that let me put this one up here, and Annie, if you could take it. How different is landing a remote data analyst job role from an in-person or a hybrid position? Annie and Ian, could you guys share how a typical day is like at GitLab or Stratos? So yeah, maybe we'll start with Annie, and then Ian, if you could jump in too.
Yeah, I think that from what I've seen, I pay attention to people getting their first jobs in data analytics on LinkedIn. This wonderful girl, Ruth, just got her first job, and she said explicitly that she got it because she was open to hybrid and in-person roles. So right now, being open to hybrid and in-person roles is going to make the job search a lot easier. I think that if you have any in-person interviews, that's like a whole different world than online interviews. Because you're in there, like you have to, there's just a lot more. There's a lot of different things to think about in online versus in-person interviews. But you're still probably going to go through the same stages of interviews. I think that, just like I said, you're going to have more opportunities at like places that you would be in person at all. As far as a typical day goes for me, I use Tableau a lot in my role. But not just Tableau. I use SQL a lot too in order to understand kind of the data, like get it into the right shape to pipe it into Tableau. And so I work with an analytics engineer we use a tool called DBT, which is it works with SQL basically. And so we have to create these kind of, for me, really complex data models. And there's in DBT, there's all this other governance that the analytics engineer takes care of. So for me, a typical day looks like I am probably going to be writing some SQL to test out what if I do this thing in this way, and then I'll test it out in Tableau. And I'll probably be looking at the code that somebody else wrote in SQL to understand how something is working. So I'll spend some of my day doing that, and then some of my day in meetings. GitLab is really good about not having unnecessary meetings. So my meetings are like getting status updates and projects so that, you're working on this, we need to understand if we're working together. I have at least a couple working sessions every week of like trying to solve problems. And then I also have meetings with my stakeholders to say, this is how this dashboard functions, or to ask them, how are you using this data? And so I'd say my role is like 50-50 in working with the stakeholders in Slack, sometimes in email in our product GitLab, which is just documents and stuff basically, and then 50% actually doing technical things, whether that be Tableau or SQL.
Yeah, that's awesome. Annie, one nuance I want to get into a little bit because I think it's a little interesting. So you mentioned getting SQL code that another coworker has written before. Can you get into that a little bit? Are you finding somebody and asking them for it? Is there like a central repository, like a wiki? Like, I'd love to get into that, like how collaboration with other analysts, like how does that work?
Yeah, so a lot for me, up until now, actually a lot of it has been going into dashboards that other people have built and then looking at their data sources, whether it's custom SQL or they've got a table, and then going and looking at that. So in DBT, you've got the documentation of the SQL that creates all of the tables. And so I've been creating dashboards that are like, these are brand new like data products for the company of like, if you want to know how much revenue we had last quarter, this is the place to do it at the company. But in order to do that, I need to work out how is finance doing that? How is sales doing that? And so it has been not a lot of talking to people, but we just in the last couple of weeks, I'd say kind of reached this point where it's switched over. And now I'll like message my coworker and I'll say, hey, I know that you're using this dimension, but how are you doing that? And then she'll send me a link to a code repository. We use GitLab, which is where I work, but GitHub is our biggest competitor. So if anyone's familiar with that, so she'll send me a code repository and it'll just have the SQL of like, these are the filters that I put on this, the case statement to make this field.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that I just want to kind of highlight that and get it a little more, because I think one of the things is like before you get the job, you're learning on your own, you're trying to do your own projects, doing courses, that type of stuff. And then once you get on the job, it's really hands-on and you have like a real reason to be doing the work for a specific outcome. And you can see the methods that other people are doing, right? So like Annie might grab this code that she finds in a dashboard or she gets in the repository and she's like, oh, I hadn't even thought of doing it that way, right? So you just like, you learn a bunch of these, you learn from the way other people are doing it in a way that I think really accelerates once you get on the job. So, once you get there, it'll kick up for you.
Yeah.
Ian, how about you? What's life like in a normal day-to-day at Stratos?
Sure. Stratos is a little bit more different than my other jobs. It's a bit more client-facing. So I'm not just working in the shadows on the database and stuff like that. But since it's more of a consultant role, I work with a lot of tools that I didn't necessarily know when I first started. So DBT being one of them, I know Annie touched on that, but one day I might be looking at running a new job in DBT, scheduling it and making sure it runs properly, and then learning more about it because I'm a little bit newer to it. So learning how to compile it and all that good stuff. And then another day could be in Snowflake. It could be like the other week, I'm learning about Sigma computing, which is a BI tool that Snowflake is kind of pushing a little heavy right now. So I'm just, being first one on the team to be certified in that BI tool. So when we push it to clients, they have me to go to build those dashboards. And then it could be, I know it's all over the place, but just this past week, I was in Power BI doing proof of concept dashboards on just to see if the functionality of what the client wants, we can present it to them. So that will help the team kind of do their sales pitch when they get to that point in the client journey, I guess. And yeah, it's I'm all over. So I'm in new tools every day. I haven't been in Tableau for a little while, but I'm in other BI tools. So it's really hard to kind of narrow down a typical day because I never really know.
That sounds like a fun job, right? Like the jobs that I haven't liked are where you do the same thing over and over again. The jobs that are the most fun are like, you never know what you're going to do. You're constantly learning. So it's fantastic. I'm sure your skills are accelerating really fast because of it. It's great. Let's go to Annie. And I think maybe you guys both might have some here. So this is from David. And shout out to David. I saw you in the chat when we were talking about age, saying you're 61 and transitioning. I love it. We've definitely worked with people that are similar. So I loved your attitude on it. You rock. He says, what job boards do you recommend for applying to jobs? No faith in Indeed and not sure that LinkedIn is as good as it could be. Are there any? I know you, like Ian, you talked about like that's not the best way in general. There's kind of some smarter ways, but are there any that either of you like really love for job boards?
I haven't used it because I'm not in the job market right now, but the query .io, I believe that's what it is, built by Kyle Malone. He was actually my boss for my first data position. So shout out to him. His little side hustle, if you will, he created a job board specifically for data positions that he hand picks and hand curates. I think the job board itself is very simple. So you can just get in there and you're only going to see data positions. So it's very easy to just go through them if you have the right experience.
Yeah.
But outside of that, I just use LinkedIn for remote positions, and I would probably use Indeed for kind of hybrid or on-site. That would be the route I go.
I'm not a big fan of the job board, so I haven't used a ton of them. I've heard of something called like Built-in. There was something called like Angel List. I did just find actually a company called Massive that I really liked, massive.io. And they have like AI features. I was going to do a sponsored post with them. I never do sponsored posts, but I was going to because I actually really liked their platform. But I ended up, they had to fix something with their registry, so we paused on that. But Massive, I actually really liked and would use it if I was applying to jobs right now, which I'm not. But on the subject of LinkedIn and the jobs board and stuff, I've seen a lot of people in the chat say, here's my profile, I would love to connect. And I see a lot of this on like posts and stuff. Hey, here's my profile, would love to connect, which is fun. But I think that you should be aware that you're probably not going to get anything back from that if it's just blindly like connect, boom, that's it, done. So when, like instead of focusing your energy on a job board, when you're making connections with people, make them much more meaningful. Send them a connection request and say, hey, like if you see a post you really like, or if you're messaging us, like, hey, I saw this thing that you talked about. Think about what the person receiving the message wants to read, not what you want to say. So like when you're messaging me, it's not super helpful for me to get 10 messages a day from people saying, I'm a student studying data analytics. I want to become a data analyst. Great. Like that doesn't add any value to my day. Like I can only get that message so many times before it's like, I've gotten that a bunch of times. Instead, I saw that you were talking about this thing. This is really interesting. Thanks so much. Like I love messages like that because now you're talking about something that I'm interested in. Because if I talked about it, then I'm interested in it. So when you're messaging somebody, try and have more purpose than just kind of blindly whatever. And that will be much more fruitful than just kind of this blind whatever. Here's my profile, please connect. Boom, nothing, done.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. When you find the right people to talk to them in the right way is what Annie's saying. Try to bring some value to their day. Pitch the value that you have. It's not just a needy ask. It can really help. The other thing I was going to add in here on this one. So I think Ian, your strategy of finding people that are posting and sharing jobs because they seem more motivated, and then like having conversations with them versus like just the LinkedIn job post, that made me think of two people that I'll post in the chat here. So Dustin Shimmick does a weekly, like he does a roundup of all the jobs that he's seen. He puts them in a post. I think he does it every Friday, and it's just awesome. So if you're looking for a job and you don't follow Dustin already, these are all data jobs. They're massive. I think he's had to break them into 2 posts because he started doing it. It got some snowball traction and people start sending him his jobs. So follow Dustin. And then Chris French recently, you guys might know both these folks or not, but already from LinkedIn, but their profiles are right there. Give them both a follow. Chris started doing remote jobs only, which I love that he did that, because like, again, I'm one of those people that remote just completely changed my life. And like, I got so much more time with my family, and you'd have to drag me in with a bunch of guys to get me back in an office. It would be very hard. And so all of the jobs that Chris shares, I think he shared maybe today or yesterday, but he does the same thing every week. He's collecting these jobs that are remote. So free way to get more jobs for yourself. Awesome. I think, yeah, let's go for one more, and then we'll have to get folks off. Oh, this is a great one. I'd love to hear what you guys think about this. So this is from Kevin. ChatGPT might not eliminate top data jobs, but are the entry-level data jobs on the chopping block. Do either of you guys have a strong opinion about the safety of the entry-level analyst job?
I don't think that, I think for a lot of reasons, they're not. I think I've used ChatGPT and it's fine, but it's not taking anyone's job anytime soon. I also think that a lot of people who, like if you're on LinkedIn, you'll see this kind of like hype around AI. And I recently saw that this Sam Altman, the CEO, like admitted that it didn't have as much of an economic impact as he thought it was going to. And that's because he overestimated companies' time to adoption. And so like, yeah, maybe at like Microsoft, they can cut a couple of entry-level jobs because they're like super technically advanced. I don't know. But in like most companies, it's like built on this like outdated Excel spreadsheet with like 100 tabs. And like, there's a huge need for a data analyst role at that company that cannot be replaced by ChatGPT, because you like need a person to come in there and deal with like the mess and like the foundation. Like when we get to the place where our data is like very well documented and governed and organized and stored, and there's not like any places that you can't reach the data, maybe then we'll see AI coming in and really chopping some things. But until then, and like your stakeholders never know what they want. They're like, I want this. And then you're like, no, you want this. And it's just, yeah, I don't think those are going anywhere anytime soon because of the gap between what humans are doing and needing and then what AI actually can do.
Yeah, Ian, same take, or do you have anything different? Are you more scared of the entry-level job?
Terrified. No, I'm far from it. I've used it like Annie has. It's good to get kind of basics. I can use it to figure out certain syntax I haven't thought about in a year on any tool that I'm using, just because it's searching the web and documenting and all that good stuff. But when I have very specific problems that I'm trying to figure out and I can't figure them out on my own, I'll try it in ChatGPT. But since it's such a business specific requirement, it's throwing me answers that aren't even correct in the tool that I'm using. Like it's just going to throw an error. So in that aspect, I don't think it's going to replace an analyst anytime soon, just because it's not there. And then on the dashboard building side of things, it could build you a basic bar chart on different AI tools, but a full-fledged dashboard formatted the way you want it to be, and then with all the filters and slicers and all that good stuff, I haven't seen one yet that could actually do that. So I don't think we're even close to that point.
Yeah, I'm on the same page. I think people that say that AI is going to replace the data analyst are not people that are in an analytics function. I don't think it's like a self-preservation where we're worried. I think analysts, we're generally objective, right? And we're trying to have a clear view of the reality and just I think like you guys are saying, there's so many of these things that it doesn't do. It can't understand the business. It can't understand the nuance with people. It's, there's data's everywhere. And like, yeah, it might produce some Python code or some SQL code that might run, might not run, might run and might not give you the result that you actually want, probably the most dangerous of all, right? So if you don't have those skills, you can't even use the thing. When people say, ChatGPT would make a non-analyst an analyst, go try and show me, make some decisions based on it, and we'll come back, and then I'll see if I can find a good analyst for you when you realize you actually need one. So yeah, totally agree with your takes there. And we had a great show last week with Alex, the analyst, who talked about this. And before we break, I just want to tee up a few shows that are coming up. So next week we have Susan Walsh. She's going to talk about all things cleaning data. You may know her as the classification guru. She's a ton of fun. She's going to be fantastic next Wednesday. Then we've got Christopher Chin. He's talking about how to give an effective presentation and generally communication skills. What Annie and Ian both said was so important, and I completely agree. I think he does a really good job of focusing specifically there and giving some practical advice to get better, which is something that the data community really needs. So Christopher is going to be fantastic. Then we've got Drew and Katie. So Drew and Katie are talking about getting from analyst to senior analyst. They're both people that have recently ascended to the manager level themselves. So they've gone through that process that a lot of you folks are going to be hoping to go through, and they run teams of their own, and they're coaching people. So they can talk to you from both sides, like how did it go for them? How do they think about it for people on their team? What is that promotions process like? That's going to be a really fun discussion. And then finally, we've got Scott Taylor, the data whisperer, talking about telling your data story. This is going to be a really interesting one, especially for folks who could see themselves in a data leadership role at some point. I think if that's what you're thinking about, I would say Scott's is particularly valuable for that. And then, the last thing that I want to say is just a huge thank you to Ian, to Annie. You guys are awesome. I think we had a pretty dense agenda, and you guys packed in so much really, really valuable content for everybody. And thank you to the audience for being really engaged and giving us some great questions and being in the chat. We really appreciate everybody showing up for this. So thank you all.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.